All right, I'm Casey Dill, and I will be facilitating this webinar. Thank you guys so much for coming and for spending an hour with us today. This is our second and final webinar in the support of Mental Health Awareness Month. That's this month. We may be having some more webinars coming up, so just stay tuned on our social media channels and emails. And if you missed our first webinar, that was 2 weeks ago, and it was all about adult mental health and wellness and supporting educators through challenging times. I will be providing a recording of that webinar and this one as a follow-up email. So just be on the lookout for that. And we are going to start off by covering the topic today of supporting students with intensive social, emotional, and behavioral needs. So this is more student focused where we did adult before. And then in the next slide, we're going to ask you guys to drop in the chat your location. So can you guys put where you're from, the city and state, and your position and role? We want to take a little bit of time to see who's in the room with us and say hi. Oh, Joanne, we got a school psychologist. Kelly from Bakersfield. Hi. Ooh, Bend, Oregon. Hi, Amanda. Student services coach or student success coach for Tier 3 SEL mental health programs. We got Megan, social education director in Tacoma, Washington. Ooh, hi, we have Washington folks. We got San Jose. Great. I'll just give you guys like 10 more seconds to give a shout out where you're from and what you do. Ooh, Olympia. Nice. Ukiah. We might have some of our clients here. Hi, guys. All right, well, we're going to go to the next slide and kind of kick this off. So I'm going to be just sharing a little bit about our organization. Again, some of you are clients, some of you are new faces. So just a quick overview of who we are, and then we'll dive right into the content with our two amazing presenters. So we are Collaborative Learning Solutions. We are a K through 12 educational consulting company, and we're based out of Temecula, Arizona. But we are Temecula, California. I am in Arizona. I'm in Tempe, Arizona, and we have an office here as well. And we work with school districts and state, regional, and county offices all around the country. We have over 12 years of improving outcomes in culture and climate. And everything we do is for the students of today who will be our leaders for tomorrow. So that's a little bit about us. And then the next slide will highlight our mission, which grounds us in our everyday, what we do with our districts. And we are trying to change the trajectory of marginalized youth. And we want to do this by unlocking partnership opportunities with educational and social service agencies to address system improvements. So that's just a little bit about us, and you can check out our website if you want to know a little bit more about what we do and the specialties. And then I'm going to go into our presenters. We have two presenters. We have Dr. John Eiler. He is the founder of the company and founded it in 2010 with the primary goal of changing the life outcomes of youth with emotional and/or behavioral disorders. He currently serves as our CEO and is relentless about student success. Dr. John Eiler is a widely recognized expert on topics of equity, educational improvement, and educational psychology. He works with leadership teams across the nation to implement integrated systems of support and to lead adaptive change around educator mindset and perception. And then we have Kenny on the call as well. Kenny is an educational consultant with CLS, and he is a trained administrator with a master's degree and expertise in cognitive-based classroom strategies. He has also served as a program director and special education teacher. He provides consultation, coaching, and professional learning services for educational programs that focus on the needs of students with significant social, emotional, and behavioral challenges. He has developed data tools to measure program fidelity and students' needs related to academic and social, emotional, behavioral interventions and supports. So welcome to the webinar, and I'm going to pass it off to John.
Great, thanks, Casey. Can you hear me all right? Thumbs up, great. I just want to take a couple minutes just to share a little bit of the beginning of our journey, if you will. This about 15 years ago, I found myself in a position in Southern California, a regionalized position, working with about 23 different school districts who served a little over 30,000 students with disabilities. And in that time, my responsibility was to oversee programs for students who are placed in out-of-district programs. These are students who are placed in non-public schools, residential treatment facilities. And so I was responsible for not only quality of programming, but also a lot of the fiscal requirements that went around that. And so within the first 6 months or so, I went to visit a lot of these schools. I came back and I was felt a little defeated. We were sending tens of millions of dollars into a lot of these institutions. And at that time, there wasn't a whole lot of mental health supports wrapped around kids. I saw a lot of isolation rooms and timeout rooms, and I saw a lot of restraints being used. And I just felt like there was something that we could do to serve kids better. And it was at that same time that I was doing my terminal degree at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. And it was my emphasis was on educational psychology. So I was looking at social, cultural, cognitive factors around behavior and human motivation. And I just found a massive disconnect between what I was studying and researching and what I was seeing firsthand on the ground for kids. And so that led to an opportunity I just developed a framework, and I approached a director in one of our districts that we were serving. And I said, hey, Kathy, what do you think about this idea of developing this program, bringing some kids back from residential, non-public schools, developing this program, and then we'll turn it over to you after 3 years. And she said, yeah, let's give it a shot. And so that's what launched Collaborative Learning Solutions. So really what our purpose today is sharing with you some of those learnings over the past 12 years. We've made a lot of mistakes, and we've also had a lot of successes along the way. And so this is really just sharing with you some of those pieces that we found. One of the major pieces, I'm just going to do this before we kind of transition into some of the elements here, but one of the major differences in this, we call it the C5 program, and there's 5 core elements that you'll hear about, 3 of them today. But a major shift, if you will, is not just relying specifically on kind of a behavioristic kind of approach or theory. I'm not discounting that. I'm not minimizing the need for that. But what I am saying is there was an absence of a focus on more of a social cognitive theoretical framework. And this is looking at how the interplay of the environment and behavior and cognition shapes motivation and shapes behavior. And so the idea was, hey, if we can help kids think differently, we can help change behavior as opposed to just trying to get us different behavior on the surface. And so that's really kind of a major shift. And you'll see some of those pieces that are reflected in the elements. What you'll see here, we'll use this as kind of a guide. We're going to visit the first 3 that you see there in the middle. These are 5 kind of high leverage elements that we think need to be in a cognitive-based program for kids who have intensive behavioral health needs. And so you'll see authentic relationships. We're going to hit on that in just a minute here. Rigorous skill development, and it's this shift from focus on minimizing behavior versus developing skills. And so in behavior programs, is it successful? Yeah, it's super successful. How do you know? Well, behaviors are occurring less. No, I want to know about what skills do you see more of? That's more of our North Star than kind of the reduction of behavior. And then the last one is cognitive collaboration. It's basically being a thought partner or cognitive coach with kids in problem solving. We have a tendency to kind of problem solve things for kids, especially adolescents. And so you're going to hear a little bit, the way that we've kind of planned this out is to give a little bit of what each of these elements are, and then to tell some stories around that in terms of what does that look like and felt like in practice. All right, I'm going to move into this first one here. On the left-hand side, what Kenny's done is looked at, this was couched in Mental Health Awareness Month. And so what we wanted to do is make some explicit connections between these 5 elements and key elements that you would use to define what is mental health. And so this first one, authentic relationship development, is connected to what we all, I think, are familiar with, is that when you look at resiliency of kids, particularly adolescents, the one determining factor in resiliency is one healthy relationship with an adult that's positive and that's affirming. And so that doesn't happen by chance. It's very intentional. So we want to share a little bit of that with you. So this element is connected to that mental health element. What I like to start with, if you can kind of look at these in 2 different buckets, if you will, there's traditional relationships in education, and then relationships on the right-hand side is really kind of what we're trying to get at with programs with kids with intensive needs. A lot of what we see in education is defined by a lot of these words you see on the left-hand side. It's very authoritative. There's a structure. You hear things like, this is my classroom, these are my rules, this is the way I do things. which I totally understand. But for the population of kids that we're working with, we've got to rethink the way that that relationship is kind of grounded and founded. A lot of it is transactional. You can have time with me when you demonstrate this, whether it's academic or a set of behaviors. You get to have time with a principal when you have your points at a certain level, or you have reached a certain level on a point level system. There's a lot of contingencies that are at play with that. You do this, and then I'll do that. You behave and show academic behaviors, and then you now have opportunities for mobility in the system. And for a lot of our kids, quite honestly, if that was going to work for them, they would have already responded. And so we've got to rethink the way that we look at relationships, because what we traditionally do obviously hasn't responded. Kids haven't responded to that. And so we need to rethink that. And so what you see on the right-hand side is really what we're trying to develop. High trust, personal, it's vulnerable on both sides. That means I, as an adult, am going to be a little bit vulnerable with kids because I got to model that. It's a genuine connection, unconditional positive regard. Even when a kid is cussing you out in your face and flying sideways, what does that look like to be relentless about loving that kid and pursuing that kid? Unconditional positive regard. So these are some of the areas when we say authentic relationships, it's the right side that we're really kind of honing in on. We're going to share some examples of what this has looked like. And I think Kenny is going to take the first one here.
Yeah, so this first example here is what we call positive phone calls home. And it's just that. It's very simple. And this is just one of our very first intentional practices to build relationships. And not only did we want to build rapport with the student and parent, but we also wanted them both to hear something that went well at school for the student. And we figured positive phone calls were a rarity for our students that we were serving. And this practice greatly impacted the staff that were making the positive phone calls home as well. So adults in the classroom were forced to intentionally look for positive behaviors, characteristics, and skills in students that exhibited a lot of really challenging behaviors on a daily basis. With this, we kind of developed out some expectations for ourselves. And so one of those things was each student needed to receive a positive phone call home at least one time a month. Staff were not allowed to talk about anything negative during that call. And if a parent initiated or asked about anything negative, we would just let them know, we'll talk about this another time. And to be honest, that rarely happened. We wanted the parents to hear our voices as often as possible so we can make that connection with them. And then occasionally we'd send a text message home through the phone or write a letter home, but we really wanted them to hear our voice mostly. And so I'm going to share a story. We had a new student that had just transferred in from a program outside of the district. He was a 16-year-old sophomore in high school. He started during the middle of a week and during the middle of a semester as well. And he seemed to be settling pretty well. Of course, there were certain behaviors and whatnot that were coming up just even in those first few days. But I don't remember anything real extreme with this student. And so Friday came around and I made the phone call home towards the end of the day or after school. And when the parent answered the phone, she sounded pretty worried. And I said, hey, this is so-and-so's teacher. And she said, yes. And I said, I just wanted to let you know that, your child's been very respectful this week. He's been using his manners well, saying please and thank you. He's been completing most of his schoolwork. And honestly, it's just been really nice just having him here. And I just wanted you to know that. And she said, is that it? I said, yeah, that's it. And she said she recognized my number and she almost didn't answer because she was really in fear of what I was going to say. And so she actually became emotional. And she said, this was the first time anyone has ever called home to tell her that her son had done something well at school. And this was a 16-year-old. Needless to say, we developed a really good relationship with the student and the parent. Not once And we had this student for a couple of years. Not once did he ever use a curse word towards me or disrespect me in any way. He exhibited lagging skills and challenging behaviors that would be expected. And then about a year or so later, he was hanging out on campus with some friends that were, I guess, kind of mainstream on the main part of campus. And he got high, so he was using substances on campus. And so I was called up to speak with the principal. And I think the protocol at the time was an automatic 3 or 5 day suspension from school for this offense. And so we know the student had a history of substance abuse challenges, and oftentimes he would not go home during the week, at night or on the weekends. His mom, she had tried everything. She had the police involved. She had all kinds of other supports involved as well. But when he would decide not to come home, he just wouldn't go home. And so with this knowledge, I asked the principal if we could do something different. I said, I understand he needs to be off campus right now because he's under the influence. But if this student is suspended for the next 3 to 5 days, he's not going to go home. He's going to be roaming around town, and he's going to be getting high during the suspension time. That's what he's going to be doing. And so I said, can it just be for the remainder of the day and have him return to school tomorrow? And we'll just make sure that he stays in my classroom, and of course the surrounding area, to use the bathroom or whatever, until those 3 to 5 days have passed. And he won't interact with any of the other kids on campus during that time. And so the principal was like, all right, let's give it a try and see how it works. Called home to the mom, and she was extremely grateful because she was going to be worried sick for the next 3 to 5 days if he was suspended and he wasn't going to be able to, because she knew he wouldn't come home. And so I went ahead and talked to the student about the options, and he agreed to follow through with this alternative solution. And so for the remainder of that school year and the following school year, after he graduated the following year, he was clean from substances while he was on school campus. And so he followed through, and it was just a really good success. And I think that had a direct correlation to the positive relationship that we had.
Awesome. Thanks, Kenny. I want to make a connection here too before I get into this is, the phone calls home are not just for the kids. I think it's just as much for the adults to have to look for something specific in terms of skill development in the kids. And that's hard to train in a program where there's a lot to focus in on that's not positive. And so I think that's a huge element of that is when we say, hey, once a week or once a month or whatever the cadence is, I'm forced to look for things in kids that we want to see more of. I'm going to be very brief with this one. I just call this Beyond the Four Walls. One of the elements that we built into the program is a funding source to be able to do these types of activities with kids. And the reason for this is when you look at a lot of skill development, you look at grit, for example, you look at resiliency, you look at a growth mindset, you look at humility or forgiveness or some of these, where do you learn those? They're not through like direct instruction types of environments where it's like, section 4, lesson 3, we're going to learn about forgiveness today. It's learned through implicit interactions with other people. A lot of these are learned implicitly through social interactions with adults. And so it's really hard in an education setting that's built on a lot of those traditional characteristics around authority, contingencies, to be able to get at a place where you can model empathy, where you can model perspective taking. And I feel hurt and I need to share that with you. And I care about our relationship. And therefore we're going to reconcile this together. It's hard to do that without some of these other experiences. And so we intentionally tried to say, hey, we want you off campus with kids. We want you to go rock climbing. It was amazing, the amount of trust that had to show up in that space that we never would have experienced with kids had we not taken them rock climbing. I mean, some of our biggest, toughest kids got about a foot off the ground. They're like, I can't go anymore. And it was good to just see the push and to say, I'm 8 feet above you and I can't go anymore. And they see me being scared and vulnerable. It's those moments where a lot of these skills are taught. You'll see the gym. A gym membership is a very low cost. We would do that with kids, I think 2 times, maybe 3 times a week. We would go to a local gym. And yeah, that was a risk. Sometimes kids would do things that we had to go back and help repair. And that's all right. That's the risk that we were willing to take. But I wanted to be able to have that with kids where they had those small gains, those little successes. Like, I didn't think I can run a mile, but I did today. Or this is a challenge. You'll see, I think Kenny and I are both in there on that picture. It's hard to see, but we're doing a plank challenge and all of us are lined up just to see how far we can carry that out. Those are extremely meaningful times with kids where a lot of these skills are developed. So one of the authentic relationship pieces is get off campus with kids as much as possible, whether it's just, Kenny's going to talk about one-on-ones here in just a minute, whether it's one-on-ones, whether it's doing something extreme like a snowboard trip, or whether it's just doing a gym trip with kids. Those are opportunities to teach some of these skills and to develop relationships.
All right, so here's what we call our one-on-ones. And so we want to provide students and adults with opportunities to connect further and develop out those authentic relationships. And so we also developed out clear expectations for ourselves to keep the intent of the practices as targeted as possible. And not only did we want to connect, we wanted to be able to provide kids, students with individualized attention. And we saw that as a big need for a lot of our students. And we saw a lot of pretty challenging behaviors when they didn't get that. And so it was almost like we had these challenges. And so we wanted kind of a solution for those challenges. And so this was kind of a blanketed solution across the board. And so we would intentionally ask students early in the day, because for us as the adults, we didn't want to get frustrated with them throughout the day and then not feel like asking them to go. And so it works both ways too. Sometimes they would be frustrated with us and then not want to go. And so those one-on-ones needed to be organic. There were no plans to talk through. Okay, so no challenges. The intent was just to connect, just to hang out, have a meal, grab maybe a Starbucks drink or a treat together or something like that. Only one student was allowed to participate at a time. We didn't allow pairs or groups of students for this opportunity. And again, that was to give one student our attention. And so students were not allowed to ask for the one-on-ones. If they needed our support for something, of course, we'd give them support, but it just wasn't the one-on-one type of opportunity. And so as staff, we would plan out ahead of time who would ask a student to go on a one-on-one. We would rotate staff and students, and it had nothing to do with how well a student was doing. They didn't earn this opportunity. This was just something we did. And actually, there were times when we would actually initiate a one-on-one with a student because they were struggling or because they were getting under our skin. And so it was kind of like, you know what, we actually need to probably connect, maybe outside of school, maybe outside of the typical environment. And so one of the first times I asked a student to grab lunch with me was one of our toughest students. He showed up late for school almost every day. He missed school often. And when he was there, he was very vocally demanding of many things. And his parents tended to give in to his demands. And when he wasn't happy or getting his way, they would pick him up from school early rather than deal with his challenging behaviors. So that was tough. So as soon as he arrived to school, I approached him and I said, "Hey, I'd like to take you out to lunch today. Would you be willing to grab something to eat with me?" He said, "Yeah." And I said, "All right, how about you think about a place that you'd like to eat and let me know just a little bit before lunchtime." And so he decided on Subway. And so after we arrived and we ordered our food, he said, "All right, what do we have to talk about?" And I said, "I don't know. What do you want to talk about?" And he had this confused look on his face. And I told him, "We're just here." I said, "We're just here to hang out and have lunch together." And so it was kind of a relief I saw on his face, like, oh, there wasn't an agenda of some sort. And so this kid started talking 100 miles an hour. And we talked about cars the entire time we were there. He was really into the Fast and Furious movies. He loved working on those import cars. His behavior that day, from the moment I asked him to lunch in the morning through the end of the day, was one of the best I had ever seen up to that point. And so he had something to look forward to. And he rode that excitement or the mindset, whatever it was, until the end of the day. And he had an adult's sole attention to himself for 45 minutes. And he got to talk about whatever he was interested in. And there was someone there just to simply listen, ask some questions, and contribute to his interest. And so this single practice for him was a game changer. And it was kind of funny because as the relationship continued to develop, he would become vocal if anyone was disrespectful to his teacher. And so he was there to kind of speak up, whether another student or if another adult on campus, if it appeared to him like they were coming at me disrespectfully, he was the first one there to speak up and say something. So with this practice, each student would get a one-on-one about every between 4 and 8 weeks, depending on how many students we had at the time and whatnot. And so we made sure to equally take out students and again, rotate through each staff member. And occasionally a student would decline the offer, but that was extremely rare. But yeah, great practice for us. A lot of great benefits for the students and for the staff as well.
Awesome. Kenny, I remember as you were talking, I remember a time where I took one of the students out on a one-on-one and he kind of reversed the roles a little bit on me at the last minute. He's like, no, I want to pay for it today.
Oh, wow.
I'm treating you to that. And I thought that's awesome. That's exactly what I didn't ask for, but am totally floored by.
Yeah.
We're going to move into component number 2, and this is rigorous skill development. And you've heard us talk quite a bit about skills and the need for authentic relationships, to be able to model skills, to implicitly teach skills, to acknowledge when we see some of these skills. But on the left-hand side, you'll see that this is connected to the promotion of social emotional competency and building resiliency in kids from a mental health perspective. But the question is often this: what skills are you talking about? What skills do you want us to build in kids, or what's the North Star, if you will? So this is just a quick little example. We can talk about different buckets of skills, if you will. We could be talking about cognitive skills. When Kenny and I started in this program, Kenny was the very first person that I hired. I had this crazy idea. I met him at Starbucks. He's like, I need a job. I want a job. I want to, work with kids with mild to moderate disabilities, and I want to coach baseball. I'm like, well, I don't have that for you. I have kids who have intensive behavioral mental health needs. Do you want to work with them? He's like, all right, let's go. What does this look like? I don't know. And so this was kind of where we started. Was we focused on executive functioning skills as our skill set that we wanted to develop in kids. So those phone calls home were basically like, hey, I just wanted to share with you that, your daughter Cami showed a lot of cognitive flexibility today. She really did not want to do X, Y, and Z, and she found whatever it was to make that happen. Hey, I just wanted to share with you today that your son used a lot of inhibition skills. There were plenty of opportunities when he could have gone sideways with, Mark is bugging him, but he didn't. He used a lot of restraint and inhibition, and I just want to call that out. So there's got to be a set of skills that you focus on, and I don't know that there's like the magic set. And so I just want to share some of that with you. So you could focus on cognitive skills. You can focus on emotional skills, regulation, whether it's over-regulation or under-regulation. That's feedback I got from kids. I don't have a whole lot of facial affect or tone or affect in my tone. And so they're like, I don't know if you're upset or happy or what. Like, I needed to show up more for them. That was my regulation piece, right? So we would encourage you to focus in on what is the actual skill set. Here's some resources for you. CASEL is often a go-to for social emotional learning. SEL and CASEL are associated. It's a kind of nationally known. What's less known, I think, and gaining more traction is the Harvard Graduate School of Education has the EASL lab, and they have taken these competencies and put them into 6 different domains, which you'll see across the top: cognitive, emotional, social, values, perspectives, and identity. And what they've done is when you look at, say, for example, the Castle competencies, 17% of those competencies are tied to the cognitive set of skills. Okay. 17% are tied to emotional set of skills. There's a great crosswalk or mapping that occurs within this resource for you to be able to look at, okay, I'm interested in 21st century learning. How does these domains map to 21st century learning? So it's a great resource for you to take a look at. What are you using as kind of your guide? So here's some links, if you will, or some resources to go check that out. They've got some great tools that you can visually see the mapping of these skills. But bottom line is you've got to have a particular skill set that you're focused on. It guides the way that you talk about kids and successes. It guides the way that you make decisions about whether kids move into less restrictive environments or not. Here's the major thing. Those movements should not be based on the absence of behavior. Those movements should be based on the presence of skills. We have got to have something that says, hey, Marcus wasn't displaying these skills before, utilizing those across settings, and now he is. And this is what we have to show for that. That's where the decisions should be made. Kenny, I'm going to turn this over to you.
So these are the Castle social emotional learning skills. And I'm going to talk about kind of how we had to start with some of our students. And so even though I circled relationship skills, this was where we started to focus. But as I talk through on the next slide, you're going to see that a whole bunch of skills show up. And so we had a lot of challenges getting students to do group work together. So when it came to language arts, math, science, even electives, we were trying to do class lessons and it was very challenging. A lot of bickering and fighting. And so one of the things that we noticed is when we took the kids outside, they still would bicker and fight, but they were willing to go back and do it again the next day. Where with the academics, they just wanted to stay separated. They wanted to be by themselves and not work together. And so one of the best things that we learned, whether it was football, dodgeball, kickball, whatever it might be, these students missed out on a lot of the skills, especially the social skills and the problem-solving skills that they needed, because they typically missed recess, right? That's one of the first things that's taken from students when they have challenging behaviors. Well, let's try to motivate the student to behave well by kind of threatening them with the loss of a recess. And so in this particular case, we had high school students. So we had, 14 to 18-year-olds. We'd go out on the, let's say, kickball. I remember that was one of the first games we played. And so they just went out and started playing. And they were yelling and cussing each other out, calling each other cheaters and everything else. And I said, well, hold on a minute, guys. All of you just went out and started playing. I said, help me understand, what are the rules to the game here? They hadn't determined any rules. They didn't know who was on which team. They just went out and played. And so we specifically worked on skills while we were out playing games. Communication skills, rules of the game, deciding on teams, calling plays. So we had strategy, we had problem-solving skills as well. We had to figure out how to handle disagreements right there on the field. And because it was something that they were interested in doing, they were willing to problem solve and handle those disagreements there. One of the other things that was very unique was understanding the use of language in different situations. So they knew we would ask for, school appropriate language when we were in the classroom. And so when it came to being outside playing these games out on the football field or whatnot, we were not on them when it came to some of the foul language that occurred. And, sometimes we'd get frowns for that, like, well, hold on, don't you need to be teaching them that? It was like, well, typically developing kids in this age range, they're using curse words or whatever else, and they don't have adults right there watching them or monitoring them necessarily. And part of that too was to kind of help them understand the context. And, you know, if you're going to use that kind of language, maybe that's for out here in the field. And then when we would transition back into the classroom, we'd remind them, hey, you know, what kind of language do we use when we get back in the classroom? One of the other things was just teamwork. And so just being able to use each other's strengths and weaknesses and how the team was going to be able to benefit from utilizing those strengths and weaknesses. Next slide is
Yeah, go ahead. I'm going to move us up real quick, just to 22, because we're behind just a little bit.
Okay.
While I'm doing that, I just wanted to add a quick little story. The idea is that sports is a great avenue for teaching skills that can transfer into an academic output in a classroom. I think of Jake, one of our kids. We had another room on the side that was more of like a rec space, if you will. And we actually encouraged kids to wrestle, but we taught them how to wrestle, like what were the rules around it. And I walked in one time and Jake came up and he just kind of like bear hugged and put me up against the wall. And normally that would look like, oh, a student attacked me, was rough with me. And I remember looking at him saying, Jake, look at my face. Is it a game face right now? Or is it a serious face? Like, where am I at? Figure out where so the perspective taking piece was me stepping outside of that situation, coaching him to be able to say, hey, am I wanting to wrestle with you right now? Or am I giving you feedback that I don't? It's all of those little pieces that are huge in terms of being able to teach some of these implicitly learned social skills with kids. Thanks for giving me the space, Kenny. I just thought of that. I wanted to share.
Yeah, no problem. So for this next one, the most common reason youth are referred for mental health evaluations or services include some form of challenging behavior, and that's exhibited at home or at school. And so some recent neuropsychiatric research has documented that youth who exhibit challenging behaviors have impairments in an array of skill domains. Some of these skill domains are language and communication, emotion and self-regulation, attention and working memory, cognitive flexibility, and social thinking. And so here is one resource. And on the next slide there, this comes from Think Kids, Massachusetts General Hospital. And they have what's called the Thinking Skills Inventory. And so with this, they're able to evaluate an individual student and just see from a skill perspective, not a behavior perspective, but a skill perspective. Does this student show a consistent strength in this particular skill? Or maybe it's a consistent difficulty. And so they have a Likert scale. Basically, they're a 5-point Likert scale. And so on this next slide here, there is a software program. And in the software program, you're able to, the user's able to put in different inventories. And so in this particular case, they were using the Thinking Skills Inventory. And there was a whole class of students there. And so we just kind of highlighted one student here. And so you can see on the left-hand side, this was in the fall of 2019. And then on the right-hand side, this is the beginning of, this was really more winter or spring. Oh no, I'm sorry. This was the fall of 2021, 2022. And so what you're looking at there is kind of itemized each skill set. And so you can look at the comparison of that student. And the student is the one on the left-hand side with those colored numbers. And the class average is next to it right there on the right-hand side. And so if we're looking at that left-hand side there, that column, you can see from the left-hand side on the picture on the left and on the right, the left-hand side on that one, there was an increase in skill development in these different domains. And so language and communication skills, attention and working memory skills, and then the emotion and self-regulation skills. Now that particular student, you could see, was still struggling with emotion and self-regulation skills, but they had increased the other two domains. On the next slide, we go down and we're looking at cognitive flexibility skills. And same thing, you're going to see an increase there as well. The red obviously indicates a 1 that is a consistent difficulty, all the way up to a 5, which is a consistent strength. And so you can see quite a bit of change within a year's time. And then on that, that final slide there, this is the social thinking skills. Same thing, you see an increase. And then if you look at the bottom there, that kind of skill summary there adds up. You know, how many times did we see a 1 or a consistent difficulty come up? And so you can see in 2019, it was 23 times. And in 2021, it was 10 times. And then as you move down that list in order, we start to see some more skills in the 3, 4, and 5 range. And so this was also a really good indicator when it came to transitioning that student back to mainstreaming or back to their homeschool campus. Okay. And so we kind of use this as the least restrictive environment indicator. And this was a good indicator for us because it focused on skill development as opposed to an absence of behaviors. A couple of guys here, Dr. Ross Green on the left, he operates collaborative and proactive solutions. And then Dr. Stuart Ablon, he's the director at Think Kids at a Massachusetts General Hospital. And so each of those groups has a different kind of assessment. Ross Green has the ALSUP, which is the assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems. And Think Kids has the thinking skills inventory that we just looked at here.
I think, Kenny, both of those are in a resource sheet that we put together that I believe is going to be sent out afterwards. I'm not sure about access to that. Casey will cover that, but know that there'll be links to those resources there for you as well.
Yep. This here, I'm going to go through pretty quickly. One of our major components of this program is to have a mental health practitioner in the student's typical environment. So typically, it's more of a clinical model where students are pulled out to go see a mental health professional. They work on whatever they need to work on, whether it's skills, actual therapy or whatnot, and then they're sent back to the classroom or more of their typical environments. And the hopes is that they have a new set of skills to go back to that classroom. And so what John decided when he designed the program is that that person needs to be in the student's typical environment because we need to see a better transfer of skills. And not only that, they needed support in the moment. And so not only did it help the students when they had a mental health practitioner right there when challenges were occurring, but it also helped us as the teachers not being trained as a mental health professional, because then we got to learn from the mental health professional how to de-escalate situations, how to problem solve with kids. And so it was a really good support for students and staff.
I'd say, Kenny, another key element of that is we would do every Fridays, we would do kind of like a team meeting together in which instructional assistants, paraprofessionals, teachers, mental health providers, everyone was together for about an hour or so. And part of that was, what did you see well happen with kids this week? It was pointing the positive. And so it was really key that that mental health practitioner was very much part of the program. And it was a team effort. It's like, hey, I've got 15 minutes. Great. Can you work with, Jake on this math assignment really quick? And then I'll take him out over here and use a collaborative problem solving strategy or whatever with him to kind of de-escalate. It was very much of like a tag teaming effort. And it's hard. It kind of blurs lines a little bit. That's not traditional or typical kind of mental health. And so what we want to do is disrupt the clinical model being placed on a program and kind of weave it into it. So a lot of successes, I think, there in that approach. I'm going to move us in the last 10 minutes here, move us into the third component and the final component that we're going to be sharing with you today. And this is focused on cognitive collaboration. And we would connect this to the mental health elements of teaching and reinforcing positive behaviors and decision-making. And I would emphasize the decision-making piece. I'm going to skip that and move to this. We go to traditional problem solving versus cognitive collaboration. On the left-hand side is what we typically see in terms of a default. We as adults have already gone through this development cognitively where we can analyze the situation, we can see what's coming ahead of adolescents or ahead of kids, and we already have a solution or maybe three that we want to offer them. And that does a massive disservice to kids because it takes away the ownership of cognitive development and thinking. They have got to be responsible for that thinking and that cognitive development. And so on the left-hand side is traditionally what we see. There's not a whole lot of room for empathy. I don't really see where kids come from. I was just on campus about a week or so doing walkthroughs, and it was, all right, what did you do? What were you supposed to do? What are you going to do next time? All right, let's fist bump and go back to class and get back in. Well, there's no empathy or perspective taking in that. There's no ownership for behavior. There's no, hey, do you understand how that made me feel when you said that or did that? And so the cognitive collaboration piece really makes that shift from, hey, I'm giving you a set of solutions to, hey, I'm going to come alongside you and I'm going to ask a bunch of questions. Just, hey, I noticed this. What's up with that? What's going on? Can you understand how that makes me feel? I'm pretty stressed out when that happens. It makes me flip my lid, right? It allows kids to be able to see where you're coming from. And it puts both of you on the same playing field to say, this is what I need, and this is what you need. Now, what are some suggestions? What are some ideas you have to meet both of our needs and to resolve the issue? So there's a specific strategy that you'll see around that. I think I'm going to share here in just a minute Bethany's story. This is, and I'm going to look at my notes because this has been a while since I worked with Bethany. So Bethany was in one of our very first programs many, many years ago. And one of the things that we noticed at the end of the day with Bethany was the last hour or so, she just got very unpredictable. Her behavior started to shift, it changed. She would almost like create or instigate these little scuffs or arguments, whether it was with an adult or with another student in the class. And like, you've been great all day long. Why in the last hour, the most stressful time of day when we're trying to get kids ready to go home and close things up? Or it was just super frustrating for me personally. And so I came to her and I said, hey, this is what I've noticed. The last hour of the day, you seem to get upset. There seems to be something that is sparking this, anger or something with you. Like, what's up with that? And she's like, I do not want to go home. I hate going to my house. Like, oh, tell me more. What's going on? She goes, my siblings, when I get home, have been picking on me. They abuse me when I get home. I just want to avoid doing that. And so if I can delay that in any way, like, this is what I'm doing. I'm like, oh, I can see how you would not want to go home to that. That makes total sense. If I was in your shoes, I would not want to go home to that either. That's the modeling empathy. I see where you're at. I understand where your space is. I'm not saying the behavior is okay. What I'm saying is, yeah, I get where you're coming from. And so I said, Bethany, what do you need? She's like, I need to not go home right after school. My mom's not there. It's just my son. I need to not go home. I'm like, okay. And I said, here's my perspective. When I see all this happen, I get really flustered. And it's like, I'm trying to get everyone like closed up for the day, get in the vehicles. And here Bethany goes with her like spin. I'm like, it's super stressful for me. And I'm like, can you understand how that might be super frustrating for me? And she's like, yeah, I can see that. Again, it's the empathy piece. See where I'm coming from. Bethany, this is what I need. I need a predictable set of behaviors from you at the end of the day. I just need to know where you're at. And I need to be able to know how to respond to you. So I said, Bethany, here's the deal. You need to not go home at the end of the day. I need predictable behaviors for you at the end of the day. What are some suggestions you have? What do you think? And this is what she came up with. She said, one, I could go to my mom's place after work. She can, instead of going home, she can go to her mom's work. Number two, she could participate in an after school program. Number three, she could fix the bike that she has so that she has an option to not go home. And number four, to put one of the LA Fitness passes in her name so that she could ride her bike to go to LA Fitness afterwards. Okay, so those are four solutions that I never would have come up with. Those were 100% directed by Bethany. And so not all of those were good solutions either. So what we did is we said, okay, let's evaluate those. Number one, Would that be a good idea for you to go to your mom? She's like, probably not, because I know like her coworkers are not going to want me around. Great, let's take that one off. How about number two, after school program? Yeah, that's logistically a lot to put together. What if we got your bike fixed and transferred the pass? Would that work? Yes, problem solved. There was no more issue. But what I want you to see in this, it wasn't about the solution. It was about the process that we engaged her in to understand where we were both coming from, to empathize, and then to come up with a set of solutions on her own. That's the value in the cognitive collaboration piece. And I'm going to move this over to Kenny.
Well, and I'm wondering, we have about 10 minutes left. I'm wondering if I have one to share if needed, or we could go to any questions or any final stuff.
Let's do what I'd suggest, Kenny, is let's just do a quick one more story so
Okay.
that folks can see kind of how that plays out in practice.
Yeah.
We'll flip it over to Casey, who will wrap us up here.
All right. So in this situation, I was working with middle school students, and they were out playing football together, and they ended up having an altercation. So I said, hey, I saw the two of you punch each other. Like, what's going on? And the one student, he says, he's picking on me. He keeps pushing me and pulling on my clothes. I said, man, if someone was pushing me and pulling on my clothes, I would probably want to punch that person too. I know you really don't like it when people touch you, and I don't like that either. I said, you know, I've watched Tommy play with other kids, and he pushes them and pulls on their clothes too. Did you notice when I play basketball with all of you, he would do those same things to me as well? The student said, I guess I could see he's not just picking on me. I said, all right, well, we know it's not appropriate for the two of you to punch each other. So what do you think we should do about this? He said, I don't know, but he better stop pushing me and messing up my clothes. I said, all right, well, what could both of you do while you're playing where there won't be any pushing or pulling on clothes? And he said, well, we shouldn't be allowed to touch each other until after someone catches the ball, and then we can tag them with two hands. I said, that sounds great to me. So can we agree that contact is only made after someone catches the ball? They said yes. I said, all right, I'll be watching to make sure this is how the game is being played. If this doesn't work, we'll talk again and figure out a different plan. And again, this was decided by a student. Kind of backstory, one of the students, he had played tackle football. He was used to being very aggressive. He was used to pushing, you know, before the person caught the ball and whatnot, but we were playing two-hand touch at the school.
Before we flip this over to Casey here in just a second, what I wanted to, Kenny, we're reading from an example that we have, and one of the practices was not just, oh, here's the concept, but we actually asked our team to complete a form of this collaborative, this cognitive collaboration. So they actually spelled out the conversation that they had with kids because we wanted them to use it. And so we have several examples or scenarios that said, okay, I want you to go write that down and share that with the rest of the team in terms of what that collaborative problem solving, shared problem solving, cognitive collaboration, what that strategy looked like for you. And so that was an accountability mechanism that we put into place for our adults to make sure that we were engaging in that practice with kids. But it turned to be a very fruitful and I think a high leverage element of the program. So,
and it was challenging too. You know, it took a lot of failures with trying to do this because it felt a little robotic at first.
Yeah.
But we just had to do it time and time again to get more fluid with it.
Yeah. Great. I think we're right at time. I'm going to turn this over to Casey, who's going to wrap us up here.
Thank you so much, John and Kenny. That was great hearing those stories. We really appreciate you guys being here, and we would love to get your feedback. So I am dropping a link in the chat, and it will be in the follow-up email too with the recording and resources. But if you guys could fill this out, it's less than 5 minutes just to give your feedback on the quality of the content. And if you have any questions that weren't answered today, or you think of some, just let us know in this form. And then we also have on the next slide Kenny's contact information. He will field specific questions on if you can go to the next slide, sorry. He'll field specific questions on the content of this webinar, and I'm also just dropping that in the chat. And we also have our website and our general inbox if you have questions about our program or more about what we do and how we could help you guys. And then I wanted to highlight on the next slide our C5 Summer Institute, which is a really exciting 2-day conference in Temecula, California. It's going to be June 16th through 17th, and it's specifically designed around this content, supporting students with significant social, emotional, and behavioral needs. And we'll have 3 strands to address administrators, mental health teams, and classroom staff. And we also have national keynote speakers. We have over 20 speakers on the roster with our breakout sessions. So I wanted to highlight that, and I will one more link for you guys. I will put that conference information, but we do have 5 minutes. I didn't get many questions in the chat box, and I did some direct answers, but if you guys have anything else, just let us know. We also will be sending out a flyer that explains a little bit more about our program and what sets us apart from other programs. So just wanted to highlight some things that are going to be hitting your inbox. But if you have any questions, the last 4 minutes of this, just drop them in the chat, and then I can kind of announce them, and John and Kenny can answer. And here are our social media channels too. If you want to follow us and stay in the know, we will be having more webinars probably in the next couple months. So just stay tuned. I don't see any other questions. Oh, here we have a question from, what's the difference between middle school versus high school, probably with this program? I think
so in my experience, I have seen the best results from middle school, and they're kind of in that kind of middle point where they're cognitively developed enough where they're capable of using these cognitive type of skills, but they're also not quite set in their ways as the high school kids are. And so they're a little bit more impressionable, and they're more willing to try the skills. I would say the high school students, obviously, definitely cognitively, develop there. It tends to take a little bit longer to, we kind of got to kind of unbreak some habits, some challenges. They tend to push back a little bit more, but both groups, great.
I'd say both of those age ranges are prime for development in this area. This is the zone for developing those skills with kids.
And there was a follow-up question that said, don't you think the high school students eventually will mature?
Yeah, so we did see a difference between freshmen and those juniors and seniors. There was definitely some maturity differences there, which was super helpful, when it came to learning those new skills.
And then there was a question, what about elementary students?
Yep. So elementary students, we can still take some of those same approaches. It's just the balance of the cognitive type of interventions and the behavioral type of interventions is different. So the younger the student, or kind of the lower developmentally they are, we tend to utilize some more of the behavioral strategies. And when it comes to those cognitive strategies, oftentimes we have to use a little bit more help. So it might be some additional questioning that we have to use. Sometimes we might have to use some resources to help them communicate better with us. Sometimes we'll do more social stories with the younger kids. We've used things like action figures and things like that to help problem solve through situations.
Thank
It's
you.
very similar to communication development. I don't know if you'd agree, Kenny, but when you look at, a 2-3-year-old starting to develop, there's a lot more adult talking and a lot of kids like mimicking and trying new words and things like that. It's the same in elementary. It's just a lot more of the cognitive load is on the adult to model versus an adolescent range. And I'd say the other piece too is this program, this type of program, cognitive-based program, is not for all kids that have intensive behavioral mental health needs. This is really targeted for kids who have kind of average intellectual capabilities. It's much harder when you're working with kids who have a significant intellectual disability to implement a system like this or a program like this. So it's, yeah.
We have two more questions. I would love to know more about dealing with internalizing behaviors. Do you have more information on that?
Yeah, I mean, the strategies were the same, whether it was internalizing or externalizing behaviors. There's a lot of good research with cognitive behavioral therapy when it comes to some of those internalizing behaviors. And some of them are pretty simple too. When it comes to journaling, something as simple as journaling can be really helpful for some of those internalizing types of behaviors.
Awesome. And then a last question, are there any scholarships available by chance?
I'm not aware of any.
Yeah, maybe just to clarify, we, as an organization, we come alongside existing programs and help coach into this type of a model, as opposed to providing a direct service. And maybe I didn't make that very clear in the very beginning. We were doing direct service where it was our teachers, our mental health practitioners, our paraprofessionals, our vehicles, everything that we brought into a campus. We have moved away from that model because the transfer that has been really challenging. We found, for a district to own that after 3 or 4 years was really tough to transfer that over. And so now the model is coming alongside existing programs and infusing these practices into that. So we don't do any direct service with students as much. We support existing programs within school districts.
All right, we're a little over time, but thank you for coming, and I'm going to stop the recording and have a great day. Be on the lookout for the email and the resources, and thank you for filling out the feedback form. We really appreciate it.